You are tuned to Kennett, Zenith Cablevision. Thank you for watching. It's time for talk. Each evening at this time, Monday through Friday, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. Tonight, Rosemary takes us by means of portable camera out of our studios and maybe into your neighborhood. And now, it's time for talk.
And we're here with the Superintendent of Utilities himself for just a few more weeks. Does retirement scare you?
It has an uneasy feeling. I've heard others say that. It kind of feels like, it's not really going to happen sometimes. But
Now, I want you to reminisce tonight with us, and I know we talked with a gentleman who worked for the city back in the 40s. And were you born in the 40s?
47.
Okay, all right. Well, we were talking about Dolph Riggs when it was just city, light, and water. And he talked about what a hard-fought battle that was to give that utility, the light utility, to the cities. Can you comment on that at all?
Well, a little bit. I know that Ben Cash was the mayor, and Dolph Sr. was on the city council. And he instigated doing some of the work, or paying for some of the work that was supposed to have been against the law. And but he made it happen. They set some power poles, and then he went off into the war of World War II.
And of course, the company would have looked terrible if they had arrested this soldier who had volunteered to fight for their country.
Right. So that's where it all started. That's where, in 1941, they established the Board of Public Works and started the light department and put in a generator, actually put in 2 generators itself.
All right. And we also had some footage of new generators the city has bought. What year was that?
That was in 2000 that we purchased them, and they were installed in 2001. The power plant addition was $7.5 million, and we purchased the natural gas system in 1984. In 1980, there was an election to pass a bond issue in order to fund the purchase of the natural gas system. And of course, Associated Natural Gas, which was also part of APNL, a power company that also served electricity in Kennett, really didn't want to sell. But due to the franchise having a provision that the city had the option to buy.
Did the franchise have this provision?
It did have that provision in it from day one.
Were there any other obstacles that were unnecessarily put in your way to do this?
Well, there was, there was scare tactics that was put out there that we would blow up the whole town. We didn't have the experience.
Yes, now I remember hearing that. Well, they don't know anything about gas. They're light people, and
it's a good challenge. Of course, the meter reading and the accounting and billing and all that, was just an addition to what we were already doing. And that was one of the reasons that we wanted it, is because there's efficiencies in sending one meter reader to read all the meters and do all the billing, and that part worked just fine.
Okay. Now, had you ever done anything like this before?
No.
And it didn't scare you to death?
Well, it was a challenge. I'm not saying I was, just totally relaxed. I was a little bit on edge, but everything went quite well.
And you kept saying we haven't blown up anything yet?
Not yet.
All right. Larry, we talked to you about another major thing that took place during your tenure, the ice storm. How would you rate that as far as items of interest in your tenure?
That was the largest blow to City Light, Gas, and Water that ever occurred, and not only to Kennett, but some of the other utilities in this area. What it did was devastating and just almost unbelievable when I looked out the next morning. I knew a lot of damage was going on because our crews were out trying to keep the lines up, and they were just losing ground because poles were, as you well know, were breaking. And that not only were they breaking off at the ground, the tops of them were breaking out as well.
Okay, and we have some pictures, some footage from that time to show people about the absolute devastation that went on at that point. Now then, Do I understand that you are still working on some of the damage that happened at that point?
Yes, we are. In fact, our crews have been working about an hour overtime each day. We did get some FEMA support to repair a lot of this, and they gave us 4 years, which is almost up now. We're going to be working until February the 14th with some assistance from FEMA. It's not coming through like we thought. It was supposed to be 75% of the cost repaid, and but now they're only paying 75% of the 75%, which is 50-something percent. But they promised us we'll get our money someday.
Okay, so now did I understand you to say the crew works an hour a day on this damage that was done back during the ice storm, and FEMA is really supposed to reimburse us for that?
We got a crew that's working 9 hours a day. They're actually coming in early to try to accelerate, getting the repairs done.
Okay. Will it be finished? Will you have this part finished within this year, this 4-year period?
There was a scope of work to be done, and it is actually more than we're going to be able to get done in 4 years, but we're getting the majority of it done and the most important areas done.
Okay.
And we're doing it in-house instead of using the contractors. Had we gotten a contractor, it would have cost a lot more money, and by us doing it ourselves, we do it the way we want to do it. We don't have power interruptions. We're working it hot, so that the amount of outages for these repairs is minimal.
Okay, now I do know that during the ice storm, that crews from other cities came. Weren't there 30-something or?
There was 23 different cities came. Some of them had 2 crews.
Now, do they pay their own workers, or did you have to pay them?
We spent almost $3 million just in a matter of 3 weeks. It went in a hurry. The cost was, and fortunately, City Light and Water had the reserves to be able to do that.
Okay, so you keep a reserve in case of emergencies just such as this?
Because we do not have insurance. It would be cost prohibitive to have insurance. So we are always self-insured, and we always need to have reserves just for these type situations.
Good to know. Larry, one thing that I've heard mentioned about an awful problem that I hadn't even thought about was that during the ice storm, you had to be sure that the sewer lines operated. Now, tell me how this works, and who would even think about that?
Well, as you know, Kennett is in flatlands, so we have 26 lift stations that move sewage down to the lagoon. And, of course, we lost power at those lift stations. But people still had water, and therefore the need for the sewer was somewhat reduced, but still necessary. So we had to move generators from one sewer lift station to the other and keep these lift stations pumped down so that it didn't back up in people's homes.
Now, I wouldn't even have thought of that possibility as being something that the ice storm would cause my sewer to back up, but it's because we had to have lift stations that we worry about this.
And we were fortunate to have water, so the water was still moving.
Okay, so you are very lucky in one way about the ice storm, that they were able to keep the lift stations going for sewer lines.
And it was a 24-hour, we had crews out all night long, and we did get some help a little later from the National Guard that brought in some generators to assist us, but not initially. And so those guys were really...
was that one of the major worries you had?
Well, it was one, but there was a lot.
The poles all up in half would be a big worry too.
Yes, and the safety. You know, it was very hazardous working in those conditions. So I was concerned about the crews, not only our crews, but all the people that were from out of town who maybe weren't familiar with our system.
Larry, as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at a case full of things that have something wrong with all of them. Is there a story behind that case?
There's lots of stories there, and these are items that were brought in by the different crews from time to time, things that they found interesting that maybe caused a power outage.
Oh, okay. Can we walk over?
Sure.
And you tell us what's going on? All right, now, the reason I said that I'm aware that this looks like problems, anybody can tell by looking at that thing. Larry, what is that?
Well, this was a new product that came out in the early 70s that was to take the place of a dead-end insulator for 13,000 volt distribution line. And it was a great product for the linemen because it wasn't glass, like usually you have glass insulators. It was made of kind of an epoxy-like material. And they just loved them, except after 4 or 5 years, the sun deteriorated the material. It's even kind of rubbery now.
Was that supposed to be rubber?
It was supposed to be a little spongy, but not cracked and turned into kind of almost a pasty
Hard as a
gel.
rock. Yeah, yeah.
And what happened is that the cracks, you can see the cracks here, when it rained, it would fill up with water and then flash over. And of course burned it like this. And so all of these
All over town
and other utilities as well that bought these great things got to replace them, and the company that built these went bankrupt, and so
I can understand. I can
see
understand.
why.
Yeah, yeah.
Next thing I might show here is that when I went through engineering school, we had slide rules and no calculators. And Hewlett-Packard came out with a calculator that was about $400, and I never could afford one. But when I went to work here, we bought one that was I believe about $70, and in fact it still works. And if you take any kind of a trig functions, like take the sign of that number, it sits there and blinks for a while before it actually gives the answer, instead of being instantaneous like today's $5 calculators can do.
Okay, all right.
This was an interesting problem that we had in the middle of one night. We had a circuit that kept kicking out, and the guys were out trying to find a limb or something, you know, that maybe had gotten into the line. It was raining. It was just a drizzle. And finally someone saw a flash, and they looked up, and if you were to look at this from the ground up, you wouldn't see anything wrong.
So this is up on top of a pole?
Yes.
Yes.
And the conductor lays here, and if you can see, there was a hole that burned into this, maybe from a lightning strike, or maybe it had a defect in it that got worse. And when the water would fill up this hole and come in contact with the line, it would arc over, and then when it arc over, it'd blow the water out. So when it would rain back full again, it would arc again and kick the circuit out. So that was a repetitive cycle that was going on,
and hard to find.
And very hard to find, and it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but they did finally find it, you know. We still use these type insulators, are still out there.
Now, Steve Kofer came to our house and was putting up something where a squirrel had died, you know, and had fallen to the ground. And it looked kind of like that thing. And he said, oh, these are marvelous now. There's no problems with the new ones.
There is a type that looks similar to that that's a different material, and they all learn from not to use that material, of course.
Okay, Steve, and your name is?
Tim.
Tim. Steve and Tim to the rescue, because we've been without power, and we understand everybody else is restored except these 2 houses. So we called back, and here these 2 guys came, and the squirrel...
Got a squirrel that got into it and got the lightning arrestor and burnt the wire in too.
Okay, now what do you call this thing?
It's a lightning arrestor.
A lightning arrestor.
Yes.
Okay, so that protects the pole from lightning.
Right.
But it won't protect it from squirrels?
No.
And so, but these type insulators are still used. It's just this one had an unusual problem.
You mean that hole wasn't in there?
No, not
supposed
originally.
to be in there. Well, it's perfect.
Yeah, and like I say, it took a little while for the water to fill that up and flash over. And this is an example of what squirrels can do. They chewed on the plastic, and then the rainwater. This is the photocell that turns the
Now,
street
they're
light
just chewing on the plastic because they're bored with life?
on. I don't know if they're sharpening teeth or what they're doing, but they're doing it. And when these holes get in there and it rains, then it destroys the electronics that turn the street light on.
So
and off.
how do you get around that now?
You just replace them and
So
hope they don't.
this is still in use?
Yes.
You just hopefully you don't have a squirrel that wants to eat this.
Right.
Look at that. Look at that. Bird's feet. 2 birds sitting here. What happened? Vaporized?
Well, they got vaporized because probably another one in flight went across the conductor to a ground, and so they were burned.
And
splashed.
left nothing but the feet.
Well, there might be something that showed up on the ground, but it certainly burned their ankles off at the feet.
How interesting. All right, you've had a look into the future. You've had a look into the past. We've been here in the office of Larry Jones, who's been superintendent of utilities here for the city of Kennett for some 39 years, and he's now retiring. Larry, who's going to take over?
Dave Wilkins, and he has been here 17 years.
And we've met him. We've
Yes.
talked with him. Yes.
Right. He started out at the water plant and just moved right on up the line.
Good. Good. We'll talk with him at a later date.
Okay.
Good.